record because I was going to record this for somebody who couldn't come. So it is now recording. Judaism is a ethno-religion. We are an ethnic group that you are born into. It is a people group, but it is also a religion. This is unlike most modern religions are religions only. You don't belong to a particular ethnic group in order to be a Buddhist or a Christian or Muslim, for example. But Judaism is both. And historically, all religions were ethno-religious, and Judaism has maintained that flavor. Because of this, if a person converts into Judaism, they're not just taking on the precepts of a religion, but they are also joining a people group. And so they learn about Jewish culture as well as principles of faith. I put a picture of Ruth over here, the story of Ruth in the Bible. She is considered the quintessential convert, where she says to her mother-in-law, I will go where you will go, and your God will be my God. And because we're also an ethnic group, we are tied to a historical land, the land of Israel. Judaism is orthopraxic. This is a big term that just means correct behavior or practice. Some religions are orthodoxic. They're more focused on correct belief. But Judaism is more focused on correct behavior and practice. And the beliefs are there, but they are less of a focus, and there's also a lot of room left for differing beliefs, but there's not as much room left for practice. Because of this, Judaism has no central authority. There is no pope in Judaism or anything of that nature. It is very focused on Jewish law, which is called halakha. And the reason for this is that this is the law is what defines the behavior and practices that are expected. And I've got a picture here of volumes of the Talmud, which is the body of Jewish law. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. And also there's more of an emphasis on ritual objects. So I got here a picture. This is a setup for the Sabbath, which begins on Friday night. You see a lot of ritual objects that are meant to beautify our practice. So we've got some beautiful candle holders and a nice wine cup and a decanter here and that sort of a thing. So you see more ritual objects in Judaism rather than art hanging on a wall, kind of a thing. Why isn't advancing? So Judaism is law-based, like I said. A lot of people focus on the 10 Commandments. Here are the 10 Commandments written in Hebrew. But there's actually, those are viewed as categories, and there's actually 613 commandments in the Hebrew Bible. And they are not always very detailed. And so this is where you get the Talmud. These are rabbinic legal discussions and rulings about what do you do. For example, in the Bible, it says that you shall not do any work on the Sabbath. Well, what does that mean? What is work? So the rabbis define that. The ruling that they made is they came up with 39 different categories of work that cannot be done on the Sabbath. And one of those involves cutting. And so we have another rule, another law in the Bible that says that you must circumcise your male children on the 8th day. Well, what do you do if it falls on a Sabbath? The 8th day falls on a Sabbath. There's the Bible doesn't say what to do. You just have these two commandments that are now can be in conflict with one another, and this is where the Talmudic rulings come from. Judaism, because it's very law-based, gets sometimes characterized as being legalistic, but if you study the Talmud, you'll find out that it's expressing a great love for God, and the central question is how do I honor God and this covenant that he has with me through obeying it. Oh, and I like to liken the Bible and the Talmud to the Constitution of the United States and then case law. So the Constitution, we have this document that's considered foundational to the United States, but again, it leaves a lot of it up to interpretation, and this is why we have case law today. This is very similar to uh, the Bible and Jewish law, or the Talmud. A lot of people are surprised to find out that rabbis are not necessarily clergy, really aren't clergy at all. Rabbis are experts in Jewish law. They've only become more like clergy in the last century or so because it's just sort of evolved that way. So you quite often have rabbis who are in charge of synagogues and do counseling and teaching and sick visitation and those kinds of things. The real clergy in Judaism are the Kohanes and the Levites. These are the people who are descended from the priest and the Levites who served in the temple. They don't have many duties today. This is a picture here of a court of three rabbis adjudicating some case here. The kind of questions that I get asked as a modern day rabbi are things like, how do I deal with a holiday that falls on the Sabbath? We actually have that coming up with Passover this year. Am I supposed to mourn for an uncle who's passed away? How do I cashier my dishes? How do I make my dishes kosher? These are more the practical things that a rabbi gets asked. So a Kohen, like I said, the Kohanes and Levites have limited duties these days because there is no temple, one of which is that you do get a blessing from a Kohen on certain occasions, and you can see here that he's making a hand sign that you might all know from Star Trek. Leonard Nimoy, the guy who played Mr. Spock, was a Jew, and he knew of this hand sign, and this got used to be a sign for the Vulcans in the TV show. You do not need a rabbi to conduct any service at all. Weddings, funerals, nothing. A regular weekday, weekday or weekend service. There's no need for a rabbi at all. So, what are the Jewish holy days? So the Jewish calendar is a lunar calendar that gets adjusted for the solar calendar. So here we have on the inside of this circle our normal months, January through December. And then on the outside here, you have the different months in the Jewish calendar. We just started the month of Nisan this past Saturday. This is not the car, it's the month of Nisan. It's got a little matzah picture here because Passover always falls in the month of Nisan. But this does shift because it is a lunar calendar, but it gets adjusted periodically because Passover has to always be in the spring. It's always got to fall kind of in this April, March timeframe. And so what you get is a leap year. 7 out of every 19 years is a leap year in the Jewish calendar. But instead of adding one day, we add a whole extra month to adjust things back. And what you do is you get, in those leap years, a second month of Adar. You see the month of Adar right here. And that's the case this year. This year's a leap year. We just completed the second month of Adar. The holy days are the Sabbath, Shabbat, Pesach, which is known as Passover, Shavuot, which is known in Christian circles as Pentecost. These are the three in the spring. You have Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot. In the fall, Sukkot is known as Feast of Tabernacles. A lot of people are familiar with that. And then we have some non-biblical holidays of Hanukkah, Purim, Tisha B'Av, and Tu B'Shavat. We'll talk about each of these here. The Sabbath is actually the second holiest day, the only day more holy than the Sabbath is Yom Kippur, which is called the Sabbath of Sabbaths. But other than that, every single week is a holiday. Jewish days begin at night, so they start on Friday night. It is mostly centered in the home around a meal, like we already saw here. I had this picture of the bread and candlesticks. Bread is called challah, which is a special kind of braided egg bread. Some synagogues will have a service called Kabbalat Shabbat, which just means the receiving of the Sabbath that people will go to before they have their evening meal celebration at night. Saturdays are the day of worship. Worship services, depending on the tradition, there are a variety of denominations and traditions within Judaism, can go anywhere from maybe an hour and a half up to 3 hours for a Sabbath service. Like I said, there's 39 categories of work that is not permitted on the Sabbath. And so you're not allowed to do this work. And again, there's varying levels of observance with that. Consequently, it used to be very common to hire a non-Jewish person to come and do work for you. And Elvis Presley was one of them. They're called a Shabbos Goy, which just means a Sabbath Gentile that you hire to help out. And Elvis Presley was a Shabbos Goy. At the end of the Sabbath, you have this ceremony called Havdalah, which just means separation. And it involves another lighting of the candle. You cannot kindle a fire on the Sabbath, so this is initiating the end of this, recognizing that the Sabbath is over. Again, there's a cup of wine, and there's also these fragrant spices that people pass around and smell. It's wishing for a sweet new week as the new week begins. Passover, which is coming up, it starts on Good Friday this year, April 15th. Passover is not very heavy in the synagogue. It is much more family oriented. It usually involves a very big meal. There are some symbolic elements on the table that are used to tell the story of Passover. And of course, this is celebrating the story of the Exodus from Egypt. For 7 days during Passover, you are not allowed to eat any leavened bread at all. So all you have are these flat loaves of bread, which is called matzah. And there's also a book called a Haggadah that is used in order to celebrate the Passover meal. Haggadah just simply means the telling of the story. Right here, this just says Pesach in Hebrew, the word for Passover. Shavuot occurs 50 days after Passover. It is traditionally the date on which the Torah was given at Mount Sinai, the Torah meaning God's law, the Ten Commandments. It is celebrated these days by a long night of study, sometimes going all night long. So beginning at sundown and going to sunrise the next morning. And you study various texts and things like that because it's connected with the giving of God's law. My oldest daughter was doing her master's in Jewish studies in New York City some years ago and went to a big synagogue in New York City where they had this all night long thing, and you could go from one study. Then they had like a snack bar, refreshment bar, that kind of a thing. But you could also like go and do yoga for a while, or, and then go do some more study and then come back and, do some other kind of activity. They had all kinds of activities. I thought that was pretty neat. Again, remember, if you have questions, just type them in the chat and I'll address them. Tisha B'Av comes in the summertime. Tisha B'Av just simply means the 9th of Av. This is a month, the month of Av. It falls on the 9th of the 9th day of the month of Av. It commemorates the destruction of the two temples. There was a temple destroyed in 586 BC. That's considered the first temple. The second temple was destroyed in 70 AD and by the Romans. And so this is a day of deep mourning. There are also many other calamities that happen to occur on this day as well. It is a fast day, and you fast from both food and water for the full 24 hours. And the tradition is to read the book of Lamentations, which is a book in the Bible, and it was written after the destruction of the first temple, and it's done seated in the dark, read by candlelight, as you still see people here doing. In the fall, we have Rosh Hashanah, which is the new year, and why do so many holidays involve fasting? Yeah, well, there's a lot of mourning in Judaism. It's not been a good history. Apples and honey is wishing for a fruitful and sweet new year. Oh, I gotta. So it's also characterized by the blowing of the shofar, which is a ram's horn. You can see that in the picture right here. And this gets played several times on Rosh Hashanah, and I wanted to play this for you. This actually sounds too clear to actually be a shofar. It sounds like a modern instrument, but to give you an idea, there's 3 different types of sounds that are blown on the shofar. There's a long blast, 3 short sounds, and then a 9-note staccato. So here we go. So this is called the tekiah. That's the shivarim, and then 9. And that's called the truah. So these get blown repeatedly in the Rosh Hashanah services. Rosh Hashanah services are both the night of Rosh Hashanah as well as the day. So it's pretty much you're in the synagogue the whole time. There's also a practice called, okay, I played that. Here's a lady blowing rams. In this case, this is an ibex horn. It could be any kosher animal. A lot of people like these longer ones that are made from an African ibex. There's also a practice in the afternoon of Rosh Hashanah where you throw breadcrumbs into a body of water, and this is symbolic of casting your sins away. So if you're at a park on Rosh Hashanah, you may see a group of people there throwing stuff into the water, and you're wondering what they're doing. That may be the case. Yom Kippur is the second fast day, and the 2 major ones are Tisha B'Av and Yom Kippur. There are some minor fast days as well. Again, you fast from food and water. This is the great Day of Atonement. You're basically in services all day long. You are confessing both personal and corporate sins. Because remember the first slide, Jews are part of a people. So even if you haven't personally committed this wrong, you're confessing on behalf of your fellow Jew. And then after this very long day of no food, no water, and fasting and services, you get a break fast, and it's usually a very elaborate meal. People will make all kinds of goodies and bring them. I usually overeat at the break fast, and then my tummy hurts because there's so many good foods there, and so everybody looks forward to the break fast. I was gonna say something else there, but I forgot. Oh, you if you're unable to fast, that's allowed as well. So some people who have illnesses or pregnant or something like that, they're not expected to fast or fast what they can in order to make it through the day. So there are accommodations made for that. Sukkot, also known as the Feast of Booths or Feast of Tabernacles, is a little hut that is built outside. The important piece of a sukkah is that there are branches on top of here, and that you can see the stars in the sky through the roof. And this is symbolic of recognizing that God is over us. So during the week of Sukkot, people try to at least take their meals in the sukkah. And some people sleep in them as well, and maybe study out there and that kind of a thing. I've taken afternoon naps in a sukkah, but I've never slept overnight. But my kids have done it when they were younger. If you live in the city, you often see in places like New York City and Jerusalem where the sukkah is built on a balcony like this. So you'll see this a lot. During this, every day during the week of Sukkot, you wave what is called the lulav and etrog. It consists of three branches of a plant. The center one here is palm branches. And then we have willow and myrtle. And then we have a citrus fruit called an etrog. And these are waved together. And the reason why is it says in the Bible that you will wave goodly branches and fruits before God during this festival. On the 8th day after Sukkot, there's an extra day called Shemini Atzeret, which extends the holiday. And then on the 9th day is a celebration called Simchat Torah. You read portions of the Bible throughout the year, and this is the end of the reading for the year. And so people celebrate finishing the reading of it with dancing with the Torah scrolls. You can see they've got some Torah scrolls here, and they're dancing and celebrating. This looks like it's in Israel somewhere, perhaps. And what you do on Simchat Torah is you read the very final book verses of the book of Deuteronomy, and then you immediately read the first few verses of Genesis. And this is symbolic that you never stop studying God's word. Life cycle events. So we're going to talk about birth, bar, bat mitzvah, marriage, and death. There are practices around these major life cycle events. With birth, if it's a boy, you have a bris, which is the circumcision, and this is also the time that the boy gets his name. This is, you can see the mother's face here. It's usually the mothers look like this, a little concerned. But we have here a specially trained person doing the circumcision that's called a moil, and this is most likely the father standing here. Girls do not get circumcised, of course, but there is a special naming ceremony that are done for baby girls. And everyone gets a Hebrew name. So, for example, my son Samuel, his name is Shmuel ben Itzhak Raphael Yael. My name is Itzhak Raphael. My wife's name is Yael. My oldest daughter is named Hannah, so she's Chana bat Itzhak Raphael Yael. So everybody has a Hebrew name as well as an English name. Bar bat mitzvah. I thought this picture was too cute not to put it in here. Kind of points to the awkwardness of this age. Boys are bar mitzvahed at 13. Girls have theirs at 12 because girls are considered to be more mature more earlier than boys do. It typically involves getting called up to read from the Torah. You see a Torah scroll right here. We'll be talking about that some more in a minute. They have to chant the Hebrew from the Torah. They usually give a brief sermon, but they can do much more. It's really depending on the child. They can lead services that day, all that sorts of things, and then it becomes, afterwards a big party with it as well. And so that's really, historically, bar bat mitzvahs were not that big of a deal, and they usually happened on weekdays, at weekday services, but they've become much more of a big thing, especially here in America. Marriage. The husband and the wife have a marriage contract, which is called a ketubah. This evolved primarily to protect the woman in case of divorce or that the man isn't properly providing for her. People get married under what is called a chuppah. You guys have probably all seen this on TV. There's a piece of cloth that's held up on the four corners. This is symbolic of the new household that this couple is forming. There are 7 blessings that the rabbi recites while the bride circles the groom. And at the very end, again, most people are familiar with this from Hollywood. There's this smashing of a glass. There's various reasons given why this tradition evolved. One of which is that this commemorates the destruction of the temple. Even in our moment of joy, we remember the destruction of the temple. Death and mourning. When a person dies, their body is not left alone. It is attended to 24/7 until it's put into the ground. And it is guarded by what's called a Chevra Kadisha, which just means a sacred fellowship. But it's a group of volunteers who will stay with the body all the time. They take turns, have shifts, and they recite psalms with the body until the body can be interred. In the Jewish tradition, funerals happen quickly. And so it's not uncommon for people to be buried within a day or two of them passing away. Whereas I think, here in the States, it's quite often can be as much as a week later. And in the land of Israel, it can oftentimes happen on the same day. And so very quickly. And what most people do in funeral homes here in the States is you have what's called visitation that happens before the funeral. In the Jewish tradition, visitation happens after the funeral, and this is a 7-day period called Shiva, which just simply means sitting. and it's a time for the family to do their mourning and grieving, and it gives them an opportunity to recite a special prayer called the Mourner's Kaddish as a way of mourning. So people come to the house. There's pictures, and people talk about the deceased, pretty much like a visitation's done today. Then there's a period of 30 days after that called Shloshim, which just means 30. In the person, it's in a less rigorous state of mourning than here. And then after those 30 days, they continue to mourn up to 11 months. And but it's a step down sort of a thing. And so what I think there's a brilliance in this practice, recognizing the intensity of when a person initially dies all the way out to a year and beyond. It allows the person to properly mourn and have support throughout that whole process as they kind of go from a very intense period to less and less intense. After a year, a headstone, oh, there's the funeral. Again, from Hollywood, you guys have probably seen a lot of times people are shoveling dirt. It's considered a great honor to help bury the person. And so you see people putting a shovel full of dirt into the grave. After a year, oh, here's a picture of them setting Shiva. I got ahead of myself. You see this lady and this boy are sitting on short stools. They are probably the mourners in this picture, which sitting on a short stool is a practice, and these are probably people that have come to mourn with them. After a year, you do have a headstone that gets set up on the grave, and there's a short ceremony for that. And again, you've probably seen in movies where people put stones on the graves or the headstones, and this is just a way of saying I came and visited the grave and showing the person honor. But even after that first year of mourning, it continues year after year. They're on the anniversary of the person's death in the Hebrew calendar. It's called a yahrzeit, which just means the yearly time. This is actually Yiddish, not Hebrew. And the person says this mourner's Kaddish again, basically for the rest of their life, for their loved one. You mourn immediate family members. And so this is the practice of that. I want to make sure we have enough time. Oh, and contrary to popular myth, if you have a tattoo, you still can be buried in a Jewish cemetery. A lot of people hear that you can't be buried in a Jewish cemetery with a tattoo, but that's not true. All right, the synagogue. Elements of the synagogue, you have what is called an ark, which holds the Torah scrolls. Here you can see a big fancy ark. This congregation's got lots of money. Behind this curtain are the Torah scrolls, which are the first 5 books of the Bible. Here you can see one open, and you can see the Torah scrolls in the cabinet here like this. There's also an eternal light called a Ner Tamid. You can see one hanging here above the ark. I think I have a close-up of another style one here. This is meant to represent the menorah in the temple that was lit. Up here you can also see the 10 Commandments again in Hebrew. And readings are made from a platform called a bima. It's just a raised floor, and quite often it is in the middle of the congregation rather than at the front of the congregation, because they're doing it within the midst of the people. And they can be very fancy. So you can see here, I think this was one in Italy or something, but a very fancy bima. And so it can be very plain or very fancy depending on what kind of money the congregation has. Roles in the service, you have a cantor, which is also called a chazan. They are the one leading the liturgy. See a picture of a guy here doing this. You have the Gabbai, which is a ritual director or like master of ceremonies. They make sure that everything's flowing right. The synagogue service is very participatory, so a lot of people have roles, and this person is responsible to make sure that people are getting up there and doing what they're supposed to be doing. Historically, Gabbais even went beyond that, and they worked out into the community, connected to the synagogue. Here's an example of him waking people up, telling them it's time to go to services in the morning. A Baal Koreh is somebody who chants from the Torah scroll. So we see here a Torah scroll, and this lady is chanting from it. Somebody just asked, do women read from the Torah? They do, depending on all traditions, except for Orthodox Judaism. Women do read from the Torah, as we see a picture here is shown. And so the Torah is brought out of the ark. It gets read from. There's a portion every week. And then a person lifts it. This is called the Hagba, and kind of shows it to the congregation, I guess to prove that they didn't, that they were reading the right thing. And then somebody rolls it and back up and dresses it again. And this person's called the Galila, which just simply means the roller. When did it change? Probably around the 70s, I think, was maybe the earliest time where some of the more progressive denominations of Judaism started allowing women to do these things and also to get ordained as rabbis. The structure of a service, there's a preliminary service, that it's got hymns and psalms in it to just sort of help you get ready. Then there's the Shema, which is a declaration of allegiance to God. Ooh, why do I'm hitting things or something. Then there is the central prayer, which is called the Amida. These are prayers of praise and petition to God. And then we have the reading from the Torah, as we saw in the previous slide. There's a reading from the weekly Torah section. This is called a Parsha. And then there's also a related reading from the prophets. This is called a Haftorah. There's usually a brief sermon, and then there's some concluding prayers. So this is a Torah scroll. This is before they were books. This is written on parchment, which is calfskin. It is written with a special quill, special ink, and a special rabbi who is called a sofer or a scribe. And they write out all of these. You can imagine this is rather expensive process. Torah scrolls can go anywhere from, like, depending on their condition and age, anywhere from like maybe $10,000 upwards to $50,000, $60,000 in price. Hebrew itself is written from right to left and has no vowels. What do I got here? Oh, you don't touch this Torah scroll when you're reading from it. We saw that in a picture back here as well with the lady. She's using what is called a yad. And this is a pointer so that you're not putting your skin oils on the parchment itself to preserve it. Here's a picture of me many years ago chanting from the Torah. This is actually a stage picture from a bar mitzvah. The Hebrew is written from right to left. So this is the very first verse of the Bible. And so this is the first word in the Bible, Bereshit, and it gets written from right to left. It is also written with no vowels at all. These are all consonants. And this is true of all the Semitic languages. So it's true of Aramaic and Arabic and other languages like that. Um, what you have is this is the same verse, but it has vowels put into it. So you can see here there's little symbols on the bottom here that tell you how to properly pronounce these words. And then you also have what are called cantillation markings, which are like musical notes. So like this little swoosh here, this little bracket here, this little fishbone here, these are all markers telling you how to sing this. And so a person who's chanting from the Torah needs to practice with their vowels and the cantillation notes, because when they get up there, they're not going to have any of that. And I thought I'd just chant this first verse for you so you can get a feel for it. So this is the very first verse of the Bible. This goes, Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim v'et haaretz. So that's in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Eretz is earth and Shemayim is heaven. And so this is the chanting of it. What language did the Nazarenes speak? Are you talking about like early Christians? In the first century, most Jews spoke Aramaic, which is a sister tongue to Hebrew. Okay, daily practice. So again, we have these ritual objects, more focus on that. We have this guy here, you see him wearing a prayer shawl, which is called a tallis. This is based on a commandment to wear a fringe at the corner of the garment. So this is the fringe that is hanging from all four corners of that garment, tied in a ritual way. These are worn during prayer. And then you also see this guy wearing straps on his arm and a strap with a box on his head. There's actually a box on his bicep as well. These are called tefillin, and this comes from the commandment that you shall wear God's word between your eyes and on your arms. And here you can see an example of some women wearing it while they're praying. And so you can see the box here and one up on her head. So these are worn on weekdays during prayer. And then you have a prayer book that guides you through. For English speakers, it's usually in both English and Hebrew. You can see the English on this side, the Hebrew on that side. There are prayers in the morning, afternoon, and evening, and then there are prayers at bedtime and that are chanted. And these 3 times correspond to when the sacrifices were made in the temple. And this is where the practice of praying 3 times a day comes from. It's from the 3 times that sacrifices were offered in the temple back when it was around. Study. So like I said, there are those weekly readings out of the Torah. The Torah is the first 5 books of Moses. The Tanakh, which is just an acronym for Torah, Nevi'im, which are the prophets, and Ketuvim, which are the writings. So you get a T in and a K, Tanakh. So you've got all of your prophets are in the Nevi'im section. And then you've got things like Psalms and Proverbs and Job. And here's Lamentations that I mentioned and the book of Ruth that I mentioned. This is in the section of the writings. And then this is an example of the Talmud. So I showed you all those volumes of Jewish law. This is a page. This is the very first page of the Talmud. And so the Talmud is made up of the Mishnah, which is this pink section here. This was written around 220 CE. CE is equivalent to AD. The Gemara is a expansion on the Mishnah, and this was written, and it's sort of this orangey color here. This was written around the year 500. Then you have a commentary written by a very famous, prominent rabbi by the name of Rashi, who lived in northern France around the year 1000. And that's this lighter blue. Then you have a darker blue section, which are his disciples. This is their commentaries on it, and then so forth and so on. So everything's kind of wrapped around this central core of the original body of law. And then you do have something called Musar, which is Jewish ethics. This is focused on enhancing your character traits of like generosity, patience, humility, these kinds of things. Two of my favorite books, modern day books on this, is A Responsible Life by Rabbi Ira Stone, very good book. And then Alan Marinas is a guy who's made Musar very popular with his book, Everyday Holiness. So it's kind of a way of focusing on improving your character. How are we doing for time? We got 10 minutes left. Timeline, just to give you a high level view of this. Around the year 2000 is Abraham, the first Jew. You've got the Exodus with Moses around 1500. These are very crude numbers. King David is about the year 1000. 586, we know that date very well. That's well attested to in history. That's when the first temple was destroyed by the Babylonian Empire. Hanukkah was a rebellion against the Greek Empire, and this happened in 160 BCE. Jesus was born roughly around the year 0, plus or minus. In 70 CE, the second temple was destroyed by the Romans. In the year 1000 was when the Crusades started. Of course, they lasted for several centuries. And this was not a good time for Jews or Muslims, for that matter. The Spanish Inquisition began in 1492, and this is a date. Remember that day of Tisha B'Av, that day of mourning? On Tisha B'Av in 1492, the King and Queen of Spain said, all Jews must either convert to Christianity or leave Spain. And so there was a great expulsion out of Spain in that year. And of course, we have the Holocaust beginning in 1939. This culminated in the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948. So somebody asked earlier about fasting. Well, I could do a whole hour-long talk on all the troubles that have plagued the Jewish people over the centuries, but you can see some of them there. The famous adage is, what is a Jewish holiday? And the response is, they tried to kill us, they failed, let's eat. So that's kind of a humorous reflection of that. Languages, Hebrew, you already saw an example of that. Here's the modern Hebrew alphabet. But this alphabet is actually an Aramaic alphabet. What was used in Bible times was something called Paleo-Hebrew, which looked a little bit different. Kind of looks more like Greek or Phoenician. You do have three main creoles of Yiddish, which was spoken in Eastern Europe. It is a mix of Hebrew and German. Zarfatic, which was spoken in France. It was a mixture of Hebrew and French. And you have Ladino, which is a mixture of Hebrew and Spanish. There are, of course, many people who speak Yiddish still today. There's none left who speak Zarfatic. There are a few thousand people who speak Ladino. There are also some other ones. Some of these I didn't even know about until I started. Like, apparently there's a Crimean Creole mixed with Hebrew, which I never heard of before. And there's several Arabic Hebrew Creoles as well. Jewish American experience. Jews are very much involved in the early days of comic books. This was, a lot of Jews weren't allowed into most jobs, and so one of the places they could get is in the comic books. Here's the two guys who invented Superman were Jews. Bob Kane, the creator of Batman, was Jewish. And Stan Lee, very famous with the Marvel movies these days and creating a lot of Marvel characters, was Jewish as well. Of course, a lot of Jews in comedy, probably recognize a lot of these guys. We've got the Marx Brothers here, Gene Wilder, Mel Brooks, Billy Crystal, Jerry Seinfeld, all a lot of Jews in comedy. Most of the big movie studios were started by Jews. A lot of businesses. I actually had to cut it kind of short just to give you a few, but there's tons of businesses that are very prominent today that were started by Jewish businessmen. And then science, you could see that 17% of the Nobel laureates have been granted to Jewish scientists, but Jews are only 0.19% of the world population. So a lot of contributions in the world of science from Jewish scientists. So we have literally 6 minutes left. Any last questions before we wrap up? Anybody have any questions or anything? Go ahead and put them in to the chat. So thank you for joining us. I put Toda Rabbi here, which means thank you very much. If you have any questions or concerned, you can contact Washtenaw at this address. Somebody asked levels of religiosity. Yeah, so there's, Orthodox are the most rigorous in their observance of Jewish law. Then you have conservative, which is a step down from that. They are still fairly focused on it, but they do allow for more modernization. So conservative synagogues can, in conservative synagogues, women can be ordained, for example. It's fully egalitarian. And then Reform is the other major denomination of Judaism, which is even more lenient in Jewish observance than that. Are there any beliefs around non-Jewish people throwing dirt? Absolutely. A Jewish person can participate in that, a non-Jewish person can participate in that ceremony. It's considered, again, a great honor to do that for somebody. Can you teach another class on troubles and fasting, history of the Jewish people? Yeah, if Washtenaw let me do it, I'd love to do it. I'll have to talk to them. I'll have to tell them that this got brought up. But yeah, I'd be happy to do that as well. So glad you all enjoyed it. Hopefully it wasn't too much being thrown at you, but I tried to give you a pretty high level overview of everything. And glad you all could come.